Chapter 4, Section 6, Social Changes in the Young Republic. The first half of the 19th century was a time of great change in American life. The country was expanding, the economy was growing, and the political system was becoming more democratic. These developments filled many people with hope for the future, but not all Americans benefited from these changes. Many continued to suffer from poverty, limited opportunity, and a lack of rights. As a result, various reform movements arose to tackle problems in American society. The Second Great Awakening inspires reformers. The reform efforts of the early 1800s found inspiration in a religious revival known as the Second Great Awakening. Preachers traveled from town to town, holding revival meetings and calling on people to embrace the Christian faith. These preachers urged people to turn from the sins of their selfish lives and receive God's love and forgiveness. Revivalists preached an egalitarian message. God's love and redemption were open to everyone. They taught that Christians can transform society by working for justice. This optimism and outpouring of religious fervor helped fuel the reform movement of the early 1800s. Few reformers accomplished more than Dorothea Dix. Deeply religious, Dix found her calling after visiting a Boston jail. She was shocked to see inmates locked in small, dark, unheated cells. Among the inmates were mentally ill women who had not committed any crime. Dix made a 2-year study of other jails and found the same inhumane conditions. Children, debtors, and the mentally ill were all treated like hardened criminals. Her reform efforts brought substantial change to the penal system and in mental health care across the United States. The spirit of reform and Jacksonian democracy affected education. In the early 1800s, few children had the chance to go to school. Horace Mann, an early American educator, believed that free, public education would strengthen democracy and help young people escape poverty. Mann pushed for a public school system in Massachusetts. His idea soon caught on in other states as well. By 1850, many states were promoting public education. Another reform effort fueled by the Second Great Awakening was the temperance movement. Many reformers blamed crime, poverty, and mental illness on alcohol abuse. They called for temperance or moderation in drinking habits. The American Temperance Union attracted more than 1 million members within a year of its formation. It also became a training ground for leaders in other areas of reform. Reformers pushed to abolish slavery. One reform movement came to overshadow all others: the movement to end slavery. Opposition to slavery had existed since the first Africans were brought to Virginia in the early 1600s. Congress banned the importation of slaves in 1808, and opponents of slavery hoped slavery would eventually just die out. Instead, the rise in cotton production that followed the invention of the cotton gin fueled a dramatic expansion of slavery. In the early 1800s, free African Americans in the North formed several anti-slavery societies. Their efforts got a big boost from their religious fervor at revival meetings. Revivalists attacked slavery on the grounds that it was immoral. They also helped people see that slavery went against such ideals as liberty and equality, which lay at the heart of American democracy. Although some anti-slavery reformers believed slavery should be ended gradually, others called for immediate abolition or the end of slavery everywhere. Abolitionists gave speeches, wrote pamphlets, and lobbied government officials in an effort to end slavery. The abolitionist movement gained power and public attention in the 1830s through a newspaper called The Liberator, published by William Lloyd Garrison. Garrison advocated not only an immediate end to slavery, but also full equality for African Americans, a radical idea at the time. Another important abolitionist was Frederick Douglass, a former slave whose autobiography recounted his own struggle for freedom. Douglass's personal story and his dynamic stage presence made him a powerful spokesman for abolition. As the abolition movement grew, supporters of slavery, both Northern and Southern, went on the attack. Mobs attacked abolitionists, burned their homes, and destroyed their printing presses. In spite of these attacks, abolitionists continued their work, making slavery the most crucial issue of their time. Women demand equal rights. The number of abolitionist leaders also joined in the growing movement for women's rights. One was a former slave named Sojourner Truth, a tall, striking woman who knew how to stand up for herself. Truth was not afraid to speak out. At one gathering, after hearing men portray women as being weak, she exclaimed, "Look at my arm. I have plowed and planted and gathered into barns, and no man could outdo me. And ain't I a woman?" In the mid-1800s, women were still second-class citizens in America. They were denied many of the rights and privileges given to men, including the right to vote and to control their own money or property. Most women were expected to stay at home and not try to better themselves by pursuing an education or career. But a growing number of women began to challenge these restrictions. Their efforts gave rise to the first women's movement. In 1848, supporters of women's rights gathered for the Seneca Falls Convention in Seneca Falls, New York. There they drafted a statement called the Declaration of Sentiments, which was based on the Declaration of Independence. It began, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men and women are created equal." The statement went on to list various acts of tyranny by men against women. In the years after the Seneca Falls Convention, reformers like Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony continued to struggle for women's rights. Progress was slow, but over time, states began to change their laws. New York, for example, gave women control over their property and wages. Other states passed more liberal divorce laws. Getting the right to vote would take much longer, but eventually, in 1920, that barrier to women's rights would also fall.